It's another edition of the Golazo podcast, so we take another dive into the world of Argentine football to discuss the latest news from Buenos Aires. Whether you're listening on YouTube, iTunes or SoundCloud, be sure to like, follow, subscribe or whatever it is that you can show us that you're out there. Hello, welcome back to our third episode, and although it's only a matter of weeks since we picked over a couple of friendlies for Lionel Scaloni's new look Argentina, we are back to do the same again. And I'm delighted to be joined by the same two experts who are perfectly placed to analyse the most recent international break. Most importantly, of course, Argentina's clash with Brazil, plus some significant Copa Libertadores action between the two nations to come. So, welcome back, as always, to Tom Robinson.
Cheers! Thanks for having me back, Peter. It was a good pod last time, and I'm looking forward to discussing the Superclásico.
Yes, indeed. And welcome back to our man in Brazil, Tim Vickery.
Hello, lovely to be here. Let's kick the ball around over the next few minutes.
Great to have you both back on board again. So to quickly recap, before I get your opinions, Argentina followed up last month's friendlies in the US with a trip to Saudi Arabia this time. And after a relatively simple 4-0 win over Iraq, Scaloni tasted defeat for the first time as interim coach. Against Brazil, thanks to a stoppage time winner. Tim, first of all, it wasn't exactly a classic, but what did you make of the Saudi Superclásico?
I thought it was a very poor game, which is much more worrying for Brazil than it is for Argentina. And the thing that worries Argentina is that they're still kicking the can down the road. You know, we still don't know what they're going to do long term. And assuming they get a new man in, he's got March FIFA dates, and then the Copa America, and then the real stuff starts. So that's the worrying thing for Argentina. The worrying thing for Brazil is that, and this was essentially the full strength side. I think 4 of the Argentina starting lineup went to the World Cup, of whom Lo Celso didn't kick a ball there, and Dybala hardly did. So it's a radically different side. Brazil, 10 of the starting lineup went to the World Cup, the exception being Arthur, who started so well at Barcelona and theoretically strengthens the side. But nothing that Brazil tried really worked. And I think that the coach comes away from this with more questions and answers about the basic structure of his side, especially going forward, and especially the problem that is, not a problem, but the question mark, which has been hanging around now for some time, of what do you do with Felipe Coutinho? So I thought really it was a 90 minutes that was defined much more by Brazil being disappointing than by anything that Argentina did.
And is that cause for concern in Brazil at this stage, or too early?
They won. They get a victory. They get something to celebrate. But yes, there are some alarm bells ringing. Obviously, you never want to judge too much by friendlies, but there's a lot at stake for Brazil in the Copa America. Whereas for all the other South American sides, it is primarily a warm up. For Brazil, they've got to win it, as for 3 reasons. As hosts, there's always pressure on the hosts of the Copa America. The Copa America now in recent years, it's since 2007, it's kind of filled this spot in the calendar, kicking off a new cycle of competitive games. So that means that sides go into it with the main ambition of coming out of it with a team that's ready for World Cup qualification. But there's extra pressure on the hosts. And Brazil being Brazil, there's huge pressure on them to win next year because they're hosts, because their recent tournament record has been so poor, and because the coach's job security probably is probably on the line. So because Brazil are much further down the line than Argentina, I thought the game was a little bit worrying from a Brazil point of view.
Yeah. So to come to you, Tom, to look at Argentina. There were some positives, perhaps Renzo Sarabia's display at right back against Neymar being one of them. What did you make of this round of games, particularly the Brazil game for Argentina?
Yeah, I think Tim summed it up quite nicely there in terms of, even though Brazil were the ones to walk away with the victory, it really felt like Argentina probably could take more positives out of the game. Really, as you mentioned, the defence looked a lot better. I think it was a more cautious setup by Escaloni than we've seen in some of the other games. But I think that's really the way you have to play against one of the best counter-attacking sides in the world. And I think when they did come out slightly more aggressively in the second half, that's when they looked like, especially in the last 30 minutes, that they'd get picked off by Brazil, and eventually they did. But yeah, as you mentioned, Sarabia's performance was very good. It's nice to see an ex-Belgrano guy doing well, and he's playing well for Racing at the moment. I'm always worried about this tag of right backs who can shackle Neymar, because we saw it with Gino Peruzzi when he was at Vélez, and his career never really kicked on. I remember when he was at Boca, one pundit saying that he covers less than a thong. So I'm worried about dubbing Saravia as the new right back for Argentina, but he certainly put in a good performance. He did well defensively. He collaborated going forward and occasionally looked a bit overstretched, but managed to make some decent tackles. I think bar one pretty late foul on Neymar, but he did a good job. But it must be said, Neymar still, I think, had more touches than anyone else, created more chances, had more dribbles, was fouled more. So although Sarabia did do very well against him, particularly in what is only second or third game for Argentina, it was a case of Neymar still managing to produce that moment of individualism with a good cross for the goal. So positives again. If we look at Otamendi, he had a good game for 90 odd minutes until he just went complete walkabout for the goal. So there were positives, but I think there's still some major doubts. What about you, Peter? What struck you as some of the positives for Argentina?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, for 90 minutes, Otamendi was a welcome addition back in the defence, and I think his partnership with Pesela looks promising, and I think certainly ahead of the next round of friendlies, Scaloni's probably found his first choice back four, which I guess is a positive to take amid so many other questions. I thought Paredes again grew into the game, and his passing was useful, and something which has been lacking. So I thought the midfield, all three of them worked hard and did their job. I just don't know how well they actually complemented each other as a three. So there are still probably more questions than answers from the game, because I think really it was the defence that came out in credit. I mean, what was your take on the midfield, particularly as we'll come on to the sort of major talking point of Dybala and Icardi, but first of all with the Argentina midfield, who do you think did their chances no harm going forward?
Yeah, no, I thought Paredes was good again. I really like the way he kind of just kind of hops and does a little swivel and opens up a new kind of passing angle, kind of a very tango-esque kind of movement of his hips, and there were some good touches from him. Lo Celso again went close a couple of times. Battaglia, I'm not too sure on him. I'm not completely sold. He had a good game against Colombia, but there were times where he just looked that half a yard slow, maybe not even in the pace of the game, but just in his reading of the game, and he was a bit late. He didn't really use the ball very well, so I think there's a limit to just how important Battaglia can be for this team. I think he's good as a sort of midfield clogger, but I think really in coming up against top class opponents, he's not going to be one for the big games. So yeah, I think we all know that Lo Celso and Paredes are two of the guys, but I think there's still definitely more space for a bit of a challenge for the defensive destroyer role, which I think most people would like Ascasibar to get a good run, maybe Santi Caceres when he's back from injury as well. So yeah, that was my take on the midfield.
Tim, I know you're one of those in the Paredes fan club, or certainly someone that thought you should have been at the World Cup. What was your take on that?
Yeah, no, I liked him. I'm going back to the back four. For me, the big plus is Sarabia, without doubt. It's a long time since Argentina have had a right back who's come in as promisingly as he did. And I just don't think the Peruzzi comparison really stands up. And I think at that stage in Neymar's career, he effectively marked himself. You know, he had a huge psychological problem. It took him years to get over that hurdle of moving out of his comfort zone of domestic Brazilian football. So I think certainly hindsight shows that less credit to Peruzzi, more debit to Neymar for him not performing against Vélez on those occasions. So the Neymar that Sarabia held his own against, I think, is a very different Neymar. And Neymar, who played pretty well on this tour, was excellent against Saudi Arabia the previous Friday. And was Brazil's leading attacking light again. And no, I wouldn't blame Sarabia for not cutting out the corner. I know it was Neymar's cross, but I can't pin that one on the right back. As far as the midfield goes, I agree entirely with what's been said. Paredes. You want in a midfield three. The traditional idea is one to get it, one to give it, and one to go. And you've got bits of that. Paredes opens up the field with his capacity to find passes in a complete panorama. I like him very much. I think he has a big future. And if you're looking at the plus points of the Scaloni regime, although the players, the legacy of players. Although they've done pretty well and they've looked competent, which Lord knows they never did under Sampaoli. If you were to identify particular players who definitely are part of the future, there aren't that many candidates who are really jumping up. But I certainly think that Sarabia and Paredes are there, and Lo Celso as well. In the one to get it, one to give it, one to go. Paredes gives it, and Lo Celso goes, but he can also give it as well, But I love that idea of him appearing as an element of surprise on the edge of the penalty area. He had a couple of opportunities against Brazil and did well. Battaglia, for me, agree entirely. He's just that half a yard short. He's all right, but a little bit of a lummox about him, and I don't see him as the long-term future in that position.
No, I certainly thought as the game went on as well, Battaglia looked even more off the pace. I thought in the first half he covered some ground and got a few tackles in, but I thought as Brazil kind of took a bit more control in the last half an hour, Battaglia seemed to really get into bother a couple of times and almost cost Argentina. But yeah, I think there is certainly a base there, and as Tom mentioned, I think there's probably a chance in next month to take a closer look at Escacibao possibly as that player to get the ball. Which I guess brings us on to the question marks further up the field, which there certainly were, because we keep looking at Argentina without Messi and saying this is the moment for Paulo Dybala to really take the bull by the horns and shine for Argentina. But it was another disappointing night for him, another quiet game, which I guess in turn led to another quiet game for Mauro Icardi, who never really got much of the ammunition that he would have hoped for, bar a couple of chances in the second half once Lautaro Martinez came on. Tom, what did you make of Dybala's disappointing night?
It was frustrating, wasn't it? Because I think we're sort of desperate to see him click, and it feels like his future is really entwined with Icardi. If Dybala's not shining, then Icardi's not the type of guy to contribute a lot to the overall play. He needs to be given the ball in the box to try and finish. He had a good chance, which I think was deflected wide by Danilo, and Paulo Dybala had a good chance with a free kick. But apart from that, there wasn't a lot. I think of the front three, it was Angel Correa who looked the liveliest. He almost caught Alisson short at one point, and yeah, he was getting to the byline. He was tormenting the defence, and he looked of all the players the one who best fitted this system. Certainly, I think his time under Simeone's really helped for that kind of. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a high press, but you could see that Argentina were trying to get further up the field, try and win the ball. And, and I think that's where Dybala's free kick came from, sort of a ball robbed close to the Brazil goal. So, yeah, it's really frustrating. And I think just from the introduction of Martinez, he just had a bit more hustle about him. And I know he took his goal against Iraq very well as well, I must say. I think his heading is a part of his game that's underrated by many, but he just seemed to kind of make things happen. He had a bit more of that directness, the same that we saw when Pavon was in the side as well. Something just to worry defenders, get them running back towards their own goal, which at any level is going to worry people. So yeah, it's still not clicking. Dybala was on the right, on the left, in the number 10 role at times, and it just didn't seem to come off for him. From here, I don't really know where they go. Do they stick or do they twist? What do you think, Tim?
Well, first of all, I just don't think Dybala fits the 4-3-3. And Scaloni said as much, didn't he, last month? When was he good in these FIFA dates? Second half against Iraq. The system changed. From the 4-3-3, changed to a 4-2-3-1 there for a while, and then he could go centre. He could go central behind the centre forward, and then you began to see something from him on the second goal there from Pereira. Again, it's Dybala combining in that area. So the 4-3-3, I just don't see him fitting in. A 4-2-3-1, yes, worth a look at. So it depends what system Argentina settle on long term. In terms of Icardi, Icardi's one of those players I just don't get. I don't get. I mean, he seems to contribute so little, and is terrific front to goal centre forward if you put the ball at his feet. But he offers very, very little. His movement is so limited, and straight away when Lautaro Martinez came on, difference, because you can play up to him. He has quality, he has class, and I agree 100% with the goal against it. The goal against Iraq is wonderful goal. In terms of movement and of technique, that was Gary Lineker. The way that he got in front of the defender and the glance that he put on the header was terrific. And I think he improved the attack as soon as he came on against Brazil as well, because you can play up to him. There were some lovely little classy touches. So, and for me, see, I would already have him ahead of Icardi, but maybe I'm biased against Icardi because, I cover South American football and Icardi's never played it. He's a player that I've seen very little of, and when I see him, apart from maybe it's a kind of Gerd Muller with about a quarter of the amount of goals. You take the goals away, and you wonder what else he does.
Yeah, no, I think that is a key reason why he's not really flourished in a side that's still getting to grips with creating an effective attacking unit. For Inter, it does seem to work, but for this setup, it's just not working right now. So I definitely think there's room for someone else to come in, have a go. I'd love to see Lautaro get more of a game up front. And like you said, I think Dybala, I think in this game, obviously Argentina were always going to play a 3 in midfield to combat Brazil's superior quality. And in that respect, you're just not going to get Dybala into the game. 4-2-3-1, yeah, that's more his role. And then maybe we could see them flourish. The only positive maybe you could see is with Lautaro and Icardi being club mates, maybe those two can form up a bit of a bond, and then we can see them bring that to Argentina. One thing I did want to ask about the Brazilian attack, though, was we had Gabriel Jesus and Roberto Firmino in the same pitch, and it was odd to see. I don't know. I felt there was a lack of width from Brazil, and given the political situation, it was weird to see that there weren't more kind of options on the wide far right. I thought Douglas Costa might have been a better option to really stretch those fullbacks, which we've talked about as a weakness.
He got dropped as a punishment for spitting on it, so he wasn't around. It was the first time that they've started with Firmino and Gabriel Jesus, but it wasn't a case of two centre forwards. It was Gabriel Jesus wide right. Nothing worked, and Firmino as a centre forward, no relationship whatsoever with Neymar, none. So it was worse than Gabriel Jesus playing badly there, because at least Gabriel Jesus and Neymar have a relationship. But there was no relationship at all between Neymar and Firmino. Gabriel Jesus wide right didn't really work. I thought Richarlison, when he came on, gave them much more thrust. That side, Felipe Coutinho as a central midfielder had a terrible game. It was awful. And he's not a central midfielder. He's not a genuine midfielder. It's something that Brazil did in the World Cup. I don't think it worked. There's obvious advantage there because it means that you can get him and Neymar together, close together to combine. The price you pay for that, and that's where Belgium knocked him out, is that there was no one down the left to defend. And Brazil have tried to counter that since the World Cup by having a much more cautious approach from their fullbacks. You wonder if, especially when Coutinho doesn't play well, you wonder if they're giving up more than they're getting from that particular deal. And it really didn't work. It didn't fire at all. And there were individual flashes from Neymar, but collectively very, very little, which is why I'm not going to go overboard in praising the Argentina defence, because I don't think it's a case that... Well, I think Argentina defended competently, but I don't think it's a case that Argentina defended so well that it nullified Brazil. I think nothing that Brazil tried ended up working.
Yeah, but there's something to be said just for competence with Argentina at this stage.
Indeed. Amen for that.
And how did you see Artur in the centre of the park, Tim? I've been a big fan of his ever since he broke through with Grêmio, about a year and a half ago. And it was I enjoyed his performance personally. What did you think?
Yeah, no, I think he's a terrific player. And had he not been injured in the final of the Libertadores, I think he would have made the World Cup squad, and maybe during the tournament would have made the team and may have made a difference. There's no doubt that I think he is a big part of the future of the national team now. But the man on the ball is always dependent on the options that he has in front of him and around him. And this time Brazil couldn't really get going. You wonder about Firmino's not really a centre forward, is he? He's better off deeper combining. You would have hoped that he would have got deeper and combined with Artur, but that never really happened. The parts just didn't fit. So when the men off the ball aren't providing enough options, it means that the man on the ball dies a little bit. So I think that there's plenty more to come from Artur in a Brazil shirt, but they need to get the side sorted out.
Yeah, there was one volley late on that he caught very well and was saved by Romero. And on the subject of Romero, Tom, what did you make of his display and the goalkeeper situation for Argentina?
Yes, again, similar to Otamendi, he didn't do much wrong during the game. He didn't have a lot to do. I think he came out sharply to intercept a nice through ball at one point. He obviously made that save from Artur, but that's a save that he should be making. And I wouldn't want to blame him massively for the goal, because I think it was more the defenders. I mean, if Miranda hadn't got there, then Marquinhos was on hand to probably header it in anyway. But again, he didn't really react to that situation brilliantly. And again, for me, I think Armani is going to be the short-term number one. Obviously, he wasn't around for this game, so I think that's why we saw Romero. His experience is obviously going to be useful around the squad, but I don't think he should necessarily be getting much more game time. I think I'd rather see someone else given a go.
Yeah, I think so, and he might still be given more of a chance next month if Armani is still involved in the Libertadores, and we'll come on to that in a little while. Just to go back then, as we didn't talk too much about the Iraq game, other than obviously Lautaro Martinez's superb header, that was his first goal for Argentina, and there was also first goals for Roberto Pereira, Germán Pesela and Franco Cervi. From that game, if you saw that, Tim, was there anyone there that you kind of thought pushed themselves forward for a starting role in the future?
Well, it was interesting to see the amount of systems that were used. It started off with a 4-3-3. There was a 4-2-3-1, and by the end, it was a back three with something more like a 3-4-2-1. So it was interesting to see to see that. And probably Pereira coming on in the second half, and he's such a versatile player, and he fulfilled a number of different roles in that half. So he showed his versatility. De Paul, I think, is all right, but I think he's too one-footed for the highest level. Well, I thought it was a reasonable debut for him, a reasonable first half for him. But if you're going to play in that position at the top level, you got to be Rivaldo to be able to get by on one foot. So I think it was a competent team performance, and probably the fellow who comes out of it best, I think, is the coach. Because these games we've talked about Argentina showing a kind of basic competence. He said it's a scratch side that he's putting together. Very, very little time on the training ground, and yet you saw a side able to operate in a number of different formations and do it all with competence. So he's putting the lie to the Maradona's line that he's not even fit to direct traffic. He's done far better than I expected. Scaloni. I wondered what on earth was going on when they put him there. Maradona's criticisms about his lack of experience would seem to be pertinent, but he surprised me so far with the collective pattern that he's managed to impose on a team that under such a highly rated coach as Sampaoli were always a shambles.
Yeah, agreed, and I think that brings us quite nicely on to last time, something we touched on when we said that when we were discussing his potential to actually land the job full time, and I think you even said yourself, Tim, that the Brazil match could be the game which decides that, because obviously if Argentina got thumped, I think that would have ended his chances. That didn't happen, of course. So where are your thoughts now in terms of the possibility of Scaloni possibly stepping up from his interim status?
Well, it would still be a surprise, I think. But I saw Veron said the other day that maybe we could we could give him a go. And the elephant in the room here, I think, is the financial position of the Argentine FA. Which seems to me, the official line has been, no, they're taking their time to make sure they get the right appointment. You wonder how much of this is, my God, we're paying Sampaoli a fortune. We haven't got any more money, especially with Messi not playing friendlies, which reduces the amount of money that we can charge. So you wonder how much that will be a factor, but I think you're far closer to the action than I am on that one. So I'd love your thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right to point out the AFA's financial situation. I think it has a bearing on any of the situations. Obviously, I think today Chiqui Tapia has come out and said that they're going to wait until the end of the year. But at the same time, while they're doing that, I think the options are sort of closing in. The long list that was drawn up, and even the list that I saw today in Ole, seems to be fairly unrealistic, given that they still list the likes of Simeone and Pochettino. Obviously, Martino now is reportedly closer and closer to taking over the Mexico job. And you're sort of there crossing off the possible candidates, really, until you get down to they're still mentioning Peckerman, which I know we mentioned last time as one which we wouldn't want to see them go back to, as really like Gachado or nothing, which is no guarantee that he would take it either. So you might be in a position where not just financially but viable options are saying, well, hey, you know what, Scaloni hasn't done a bad job and he's there already, so let's give him a chance. I mean, Tom, from that list, is there anyone that you genuinely think the AFA could or will go for?
I mean, I think just having Pochettino and Simeone on there is a joke. I can't believe they even think that they've got a chance of luring them for a good maybe 10 or 20 years, and patriotism alone would manage to lure them back. So, yeah, as Martino looks less of an option, not that I think he would ever consider coming back to the AFA, as we mentioned last time. I think that they've wasted the time, and I think it is due to their financial constraints. And I think that Gallardo, as I said last time, I think would be the most realistic possibility. But just looking at the way that Scaloni's handled himself and the way he was on the touchline against Brazil as well. I mean, he was pretty much on the pitch for a good portion of the game. I don't think he was out of his technical area more than he was in it. And he really shows that he wants it. He's not just there for a ride. And that's only, one goal conceded in 4 games, their first defeat. They've looked good in the first half of most of the games they've played. And yeah, there's been flexibility. There's been a real identity and system, which you couldn't really say before. So I don't think there's anything wrong with a lack of experience. If he seems the right fit for the job, and certainly I think they could give him a go at the Copa America. And if it didn't work out, as we said, realistically Brazil are the only side that look like they should be winning that tournament. Maybe you could make an argument for Uruguay or maybe Colombia if they manage to find a nice combination. But yeah, I think it's a free hit really for Argentina, and they could kind of say, okay, Scaloni, you've done a good job. We'll give you a go, when really they're just trying to save the pennies and wait for maybe a more high-profile manager to become available. So, yeah, as you said, the net is tightening, and there's not many fish in there. So let's see what happens. As we know with Argentinian football, it could go anywhere really.
Yeah, so we'll go obviously next month. Argentina will play Mexico twice as part of their international break. Presumably, that's still going to be minus Messi and most of that group. As I said, obviously Otamendi being the exception to have come back. I don't think next month we'll see much change. I'll come to you to ask you about Brazil in a second, Tim. But Tom, what do you expect from those games next month?
It's going to be interesting, really. I think it'll be an interesting test where we can really see Argentina maybe go for it a bit more than they have against the likes of Colombia and Brazil. The games against Guatemala and Iraq, they're obviously sort of lower tier nations that you'd expect Argentina, even in a sort of changing of the guard stage, you'd still be expecting them to beat them. So I think this gives Scaloni a real chance to go out there, make a statement against a team that's not in its best moment. They lost recently to Chile, and I think there were losses to the US and Uruguay as well. So it could be a good time, especially as their sort of managerial situations up in the air as well. I mean, you're more of the Mexican expert than I am, so I think you'd know best, Peter.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, they're in a fairly similar situation with an unknown managerial position. So a lot could happen between now and then. But yeah, I think, as you say, I think it's another opportunity for Scaloni to impress, and I think it's a good level of opposition, given that the last two we've seen one very poor opponent, then a decent opponent, and I think Mexico probably falls somewhere in between, and I think it should be a good marker there for Argentina. Tim, unless you've got anything to add on Argentina's situation, what are you looking for from Brazil next month?
Well, next game up is Uruguay in London, and then they haven't definitely fixed up a second game at the moment, but it's probably Cameroon. And obviously, the Uruguay one is fascinating because then you're meeting a team which is a kind of at a similar stage of development, and especially if Jimenez comes back is fit, they will defend better than they did against Japan when they lost 4-3. What I would be interested to see is, because I think the coach really has to have a look at the architecture of his team, and I think there are the raw materials to have a little bit of a change. And ever since he's come in now, it's been more than 2 years. He calls it a 4-1-4-1. You could see it as a 4-3-3. I think he prefers to see it as a 4-1-4-1 because he likes the idea of that block of having a block there behind his centre forward. What I think could well be viable is a 4-2-3-1, and he's got with Casemiro and Artur, he's got there two central midfielders who don't necessarily have to bomb into the penalty area as in the way that Paulinho did, and then you have the chance of, with a 4-2-3-1, you have the chance of Neymar playing centrally, playing from centrally, being free to wander, because they are very much a hostage to him now. Even more than the World Cup now that they've decided that he's the captain. You have Neymar wandering from a central position and Coutinho where he's best, high up, floating in from the left. Someone like Douglas Costa wide right, a centre forward, which is still a problem position, but there are some options there, and I think that's something that would work better than Argentina, because I thought it really was a poor game from attacking point of view for Brazil with good players. So I think there's real scope to have a look at the architecture of the team. Now Brazil are a kind of two-headed monster at the moment because they've got 1.5 eyes on the long term, on the short term, and half an eye on the long term. So the Uruguay game would be, in my eyes, for something like that with your full-strength team, and then the Cameroon game afterwards is to blood your youngsters who you're expecting to come into the side and contend for places during the course of the next set of World Cup qualifiers.
Okay, and finally, after looking back on one Argentina-Brazil contest, it would be remiss not to get both your views on a couple of huge Libertadores clashes coming up next week. River Plate take on holders Grêmio on Tuesday before Palmeiras travel to La Bombonera to take on Boca on Wednesday for the semi-final first legs. What can we expect from these two ties, Tim?
Well, we've got four favourites, four absolute giant teams with power of investment. Whether the Argentine clubs, given what's happened to the currency and the fact that so many contracts are in dollar, can sustain this depth of squad, I'm inclined to doubt. But for the moment, we've got two wonderful ties, which I think, certainly on paper, they look contrasting. And Grêmio against River is one. It looks like one for the purists. That's two footballing sides, whereas Boca and Palmeiras, I think we could see plenty of the dark arts. That there are two sides who can play, but I think there might be some skullduggery going on in that one. So one for the purists and one for the aficionado of the dark arts.
And how are you looking forward to this matchup, Tom? Was there one particularly that you're certainly going to be glued to?
I think, as Tim said, I think the Boca Palmeiras game has got plenty of potential for drama. Anything with Felipe Melo and but potentially Carlos Tevez, even though he's not getting much of a look in these days. I think that has scope to be quite a fun game. River and Grêmio, I think, great footballing sides, but I think let's not underestimate how good defensively they both are. Gallardo, especially in these cup competitions, loves to get pragmatic, and he has been more than happy to take his fair share of 0-0 draws. So I wouldn't be surprised to see River try and grind one out. I think Grêmio are the better team of the two, especially with some of the injuries that River have right now. The one thing that I think about Grêmio is maybe they're lacking a real centre forward. They've managed to get goals from Everton on the wing, but I think that's one thing that could come up short for them. And you never know, if Prato decides to turn up finally, then he could turn it. And obviously Juan Fernando Quintero, we cannot deny that this is a player capable of winning any tie. So I think there's plenty of excitement to go for, and they are four of probably the best teams in the competitions. Cruzeiro might feel harsh that I haven't mentioned them, but I think when you're looking at the start of the tournament, these were four sides you would expect to be there or thereabouts. Boca obviously started very slowly, but have grown into it, and with players like Benedetto and the additions of Zarate and Villa as well, they're looking good, and certainly going forward that they can cause Palmeiras some problems. But I wouldn't like to predict a winner out of those. I think anyone will fancy themselves for this. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, you mentioned it there in passing that Cruzeiro might feel a bit aggrieved at not being involved. Certainly a feature of this tournament has been some of the decision making both on and off the field. Brazilian clubs have come away feeling slightly hard done by, and there's talk of conspiracies. Certainly Boca and River have probably been two of the two sides that have benefited the most. Is there any sense of apprehension around that, Tim, in Brazil?
Yes, there is. Brazil is inclined to believe sometimes that the whole thing is a conspiracy against them. We're the only country who speaks Portuguese and so on. The whole thing is stacked up against us. I remember when the end of the Santos Independiente game, when the Santos fans rioted. To its eternal shame, I think the Fox network here in Brazil, which takes a very nationalistic approach, the slogan is we support together. They said that the commentators and so on seem to justify what the Santos fans were doing. They're saying this is understandable violence. If Boca Juniors were in the same position, nothing would have happened. Nothing. And obviously, they're just so fucking stupid. Boca were kicked out of the Libertadores just a few years ago. They don't even know our own fucking history. It's deeply, deeply depressing. Now, I agree. I agree that there's been a CONMEBOL extremely ham-fisted in the way that several things have been handled, but there has been a process that's been applied, and the word that the Brazilian press didn't seem to want to utter was temuco.
Yeah.
Because there is a clear precedence. You can argue about the rules, but the rules exist, and the rules say that. And I think it's very harsh, to put the responsibility onto the opposing team to make a complaint within 24 hours. But in a timescale of the Libertadores, you've got to have it. You've got to have some cut-off point. Otherwise, everything's decided in the law courts. So there was a procedure that was followed, in my view, very, very harshly, to take away a victory of Temuco, which again was against an Argentine side. But there was a procedure that was followed, and from that point, it was absolutely clear that there was only one possible outcome in the case of Carlos Sanchez of Santos. There was no other possible outcome. Much was made of the fact that the final verdict came on the day of the game, but everyone knew it was going to come on. There wasn't time for it to come a great deal earlier. I thought again, the punishment for Carlos Sanchez was very, very harsh, but there was a procedure that was followed. The rules were, however flawed that they were, the rules were followed in the case of Carlos Sanchez. And, over the two games, Independiente clearly did more than Santos did. In the case of the Dede sending off, which I think we all agree was extremely harsh, and it did, no doubt about it, it did cost Cruzeiro the second goal. Against it came right in the area there at that far post that usually Dede, who is in magnificent form, that he would have cleaned up in the air. First half though, Cruzeiro didn't play any football. And second game again, Boca were better, and Cruzeiro just seemed fixated on trying to intimidate the goalkeeper. And so I think Cruzeiro only have themselves to blame. They have a squad of players who are capable of better. And over the two legs, I don't think you could argue that Boca shaded it. The conspiracy theories, I think, are deeply depressing and a little bit ignorant, because there was a context there. The procedure that happened with Santos was the same procedure that happened with Temuco. In the case of Zuccolini, and I can't believe that having Zuccolini on the pitch is an unfair advantage to anyone. But in the case of Zuccolini, again, that process was followed. No, the opponents did not complain within the 24-hour period. So procedure has been followed. The laws haven't just been ripped up and applied in order to favour the Argentine sides. So I think a little less nationalism and a little bit more research and a little bit more of a cool head would benefit us all.
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, that's often lacking throughout South America, and obviously everyone loves a good conspiracy theory. So it didn't take much for that to spread like wildfire.
The conspiracy theory, it's so easy to squash this conspiracy theory. So easy. And again, this is a thing that a lot of the Brazilian, I go on Brazilian TV and I try to make these points. If Argentina dominated the backs, and I accept that the Argentine clubs are very, very powerful behind the scenes. They know how to pull levers. But if the Argentine clubs dominated the Libertadores, what would the calendar of the tournament be? It would start in August and it would end in May, because that's the calendar of and that's what the Argentine clubs want. I mean, it's extraordinary that the Argentine clubs managed to get through the first knockout round, in August, because in Grêmio we're just seconds away from being eliminated by Estudiantes, because you're dealing with Argentine sides in a different season, in some cases with different coaches, with different playing lineups, who haven't had one competitive game behind them. Now, while the Brazil clubs at that point are at their absolute peak, at their absolute mid-season peak. So if Argentina did dominate everything that happened in the Libertadores, the calendar would end in August and would start in August and end in May, instead of following what Brazil does and now what the entire rest of the continent does, because everyone else has moved. Argentina are isolated, starting in January and going through to December.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that as well with that Grêmio side, it wasn't even a good Estudiantes side. I think they were fortunate that they'd got rid of Bernardi, their coach, and had a bit of a new manager bounce from that, and with some of the kids in. But yeah, it's I think that all this talk of conspiracy theories against or in favour of the Argentinian clubs is absolutely ludicrous. And I think just because the Argentinian clubs admin and lawyers seem to be a bit more on point when it comes to registering complaints, that's what's got them through. I think just because it has been Boca and River who've profited. I mean, they weren't the only Argentinian clubs. I think most of the big five also had these decisions go in their favour because they were just a bit more on the ball. I agree, it was very, very harsh. But yeah, once that precedent was set with Temuco, then everyone knew what the outcome was going to be. So yeah, I'm totally behind you on that one, Tim. And I think with that, talking of Boca's keeper there as well, it's going to be very interesting to see how that affects things. That if they're going to stick with Rossi or they've brought in Carlos Lampe, it's going to be fascinating to see if that's something that could maybe tip the balance in favour of Palmeiras as well.
Yeah, I wanted to get your opinion on Boca and River, given that we seem to have not quite come full circle, but only a few months ago it was Boca in the ascendancy, tipped really strongly in the Libertadores, and at the time when River were struggling for goals, and admittedly they weren't actually losing games, but had quite a slow start to the Superliga season, and there was sort of grumbling about the fact that they were struggling for goals. Since then, they still haven't lost, and they've now set a club record unbeaten run, and are scoring. Where do you see the two clubs at this stage? And I mean, do you think, for example, in the case of Boca, that Barros Schelotto's under pressure coming into this semi-final? Tom?
I feel like Barros Schelotto's been under pressure for quite some time, really, and even though Boca have been winning back-to-back leagues, and I think almost 3 out of the last 4, even when they had Arrua Barrena in charge, they were just, there's sense that they were never quite happy enough with their performances. I guess a lot of that might come down to their lack of success in the Libertadores, but I think that Barros Schelotto is coming towards the end of his reign at Boca. He's certainly capable of taking this this talented and very deep squad to the final and winning. I think they've got the difference makers in the final third. I think they've got some excellent midfielders in Wilmar Barrios, who's fantastic, and even yellow card machine Pablo Perez is having a good couple of games. Couple of question marks about their defence, but I think like I said, it'll be interesting what happens with the goalkeeping situation, because for me, Rossi, I feel really bad for him because he's been in goal for the last 2 seasons. They've won the title. He's not really done too much wrong, and yet the fans just don't want him there and they don't trust him. So I really, just for him, almost hope that Boca can do it. I do like Palmeiras. I think they've got some good players there, and they've been quite professional about the way they've gone about things. But yeah, with River, I think their defensive record is what's carried them through. I think if they were to click in the final third, then they would be a force to be reckoned with. But I don't quite see them having as deep a squad as the other 3 teams in the tournament. I think, I don't know, I just feel like there's something lacking. They've got the recent history in the tournament to suggest that they could get through, and they have got an excellent manager. So we'll see, but I think it is extremely hard to call. I before the tournament, I tipped Boca to win the whole thing, and I was getting very worried during the group stages. But I think I'm gonna stick with out of the 2 Argentinian sides, I think Boca will go the furthest.
And Tim, how do you assess their chances?
Well, the thing that surprises me with River is a defensive record. Because I look at the individuals, and I'm not sure about any of them defensively. Any of that line of 4, and Armani once a game comes up with something outstanding. But where I like Gallardo is some of the things that he's done recently up front, especially what he's done with Santos Borré. Mm-hmm. Having his movement, his pace and movement behind the line, opening up the field for the other striker, Prato or whatever, to come from deep. I think Gallardo was. See, I suspected that Gallardo's reign had probably come to an end after the semi-final defeat to Lanús a year ago, but he hasn't. He's kept on going. And he's kept on adding different things. When he first started, I thought all he could do was a diamond, and that was it. But he keeps adding new things. Although one day I always suspect that defence is going to collapse, because I look at any of them and I think, you wonder what Everton will do to them. Getting behind the line, getting behind Maidana and is it Montiel. With Boca, in a way, I think similarly. I think Boca have. They have the attacking strength in depth is huge now. They've got Cardona, Tevez. I'm not a great Tevez fan, to be honest, especially not at this stage in his career, and I think that's been a problem for the coach. But up front, they've got a lot of strength in depth. I really like Villa, the new Colombian. I think there's a potential match winner there, given space on the counter attack. So and that's going to be really, really interesting to see him, especially at Palmeiras ground. Palmeiras have so much money. They've got such strength in depth. They're almost, sometimes playing a different style. They're playing different centre-backs in the league and different centre-backs in the cup, and they're all good. So Palmeiras have huge, huge strength in depth all over. Lucas Lima, who a couple of years ago was wearing Brazil's number 10 shirt, scored in the World Cup qualifier in last time around in Argentina. He can't get in the team. He comes off the bench, and Lucas Lima and Moisés together, they can play. Dudu is one of the finest players in South America. Mm-hmm. There's talent there, and they're a Scolari side, so that they know all about the dark arts of cup competitions. So I look at both the Argentine sides and think, in an open fight, if you need to come out, can you really defend at this level? And I'm not particularly sure. I think the ideal result for the competition would be one of each. So you get a Brazil-Argentina final. I know lots of people would like a Boca River final, but I think a Brazil-Argentina final like we had last year would be the perfect end. And whoever gets through, it's going to set up just the possibility, the chink of light, that this could be South America's year in the World Club Cup. With Real Madrid, obviously very, very different from the Real Madrid that won the Champions League. You just suspect that maybe this year the Europeans are a little bit more vulnerable. We're going to get a South American heavyweight, so maybe we'll have a game worth watching.
Yeah. So you're. That was how I was going to finish, but it sounds though you're going for a Brazil-Argentina final, Tim.
I don't know what my dog's going for, but he's going for something. Well, I'm going for it because that's what I would like. And it could be any of the four. I would give 25% of favoritism to all four candidates.
And Tom, are you going to tell us that we're going to have a Superclásico final?
No, I don't think we'll have a Superclásico final. I think that it will be an Argentinian-Brazilian final. Which way round it is, I'm not entirely sure. But I think, as Tim said, it's going to be a heavyweight, and well, depending on who gets there, it might not be the prettiest football, but certainly it's going to be quite a box office match, which is I think something we can all get behind.
Absolutely, two wonderful semi-finals, which in turn should give us a great final, and as Tim mentioned there, should hopefully see South America well represented at the Club World Cup. So I think we'll leave it there for today, guys, seeing as we're coming in at just under the hour. So once again, thank you as ever to Tom.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's been a pleasure as always.
And thanks again, Tim, for your input there on Brazil, and hopefully we can get you on again at some point.
Yeah, why not? Thanks for putting up with me.
Great. Thanks very much, guys, and hopefully you can listen to us again very soon. Thanks for listening as ever. Follow or subscribe to keep up to date when the next episode is available, or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. All the details are in the information below. Feel free to leave us a comment or any of the mentioned platforms, whether you have questions or requests, and we will try and get back to you. Thanks again, and we will speak again soon.